sometimes when we're reactive, it gives this message that you shouldn't have these feelings. You're wrong or bad for having these feelings. And the truth is everybody has every range of feelings. And when we can sit and practice being non-reactive with them, we give our kids the implicit message that it's okay, that this is normal, this is human, and I'm still here for you.
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. For this episode, I sat down with mindfulness mentor Hunter Clarke-Fields, host of the Mindful Mama podcast and author of the new book, Raising Good Humans, for a conversation about the benefits of mindfulness for parents. I love Hunter's empathetic and research-oriented perspective on the intersection of mindfulness and parenting, and I wanted to share her insight with listeners as I truly believe these practices are equally important, if not more so, for parents raising differently wired kids. In our conversation, we talk about the difference between mindfulness and meditation, using mindfulness practices to retrain our brains to handle difficult emotions. This was what I got so much out of. And the importance of not just self-care, but self-compassion for parents. There are a lot of good tools and insights in here. I hope you enjoy it. And now here is my conversation with Hunter. Hello, Hunter. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Debbie. So glad to be here.
I'm happy to have you on the show. Your work is so in alignment with Tilt Parenting, what we do, and your new book is such a great fit for this audience. And I know you actually reach a much larger audience, not specifically parents of differently wired kids, but your work is so relevant to my community. So as a way to get started, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, what you do, who you are in the world, both in your professional life and as a parent?
Sure. As a parent, my daughter is, as we record this, on the cusp of 13, my oldest daughter. And I have a younger daughter who's on the cusp of 10. And when my oldest daughter was younger, when she was like 2, I was really, really struggling. I come out all the learning that is in Raising Good Humans and in the work very honestly, in that I was pretty bad at all of these things. I felt like I was failing at parenting. When my daughter was 2, I was really struggling. I was yelling at her, and it was just so much harder than I thought it would be. And she's a very precocious kid, and she's really intense. She's like, a highly sensitive person. And she was just letting me know very clearly that the way I was doing things was not working. And so I had to really dive into like a whole bunch of learning. And I had been studying and reading about mindfulness since I was a teenager for myself, because I happen to be a highly sensitive person, go figure. And then I had been practicing for a few years before she was born. But I knew that was really the sort of the key to like lowering my reactivity lay in that realm. So I had to really kind of dive back into that, but also then diving into the parenting world and learning about what are the best practices and realizing that these two worlds needed to talk to each other. And so that is where my work comes in that I bring these two worlds together where, because sort of in the parenting world, there would be all this wonderful, like great advice of how to respond, but there's a whole bunch of things that you just can't do when you're losing it because you just can't access that part of your brain, literally. And then in that mindfulness world, there is this kind of idea that, well, once you calm down, just sort of everything will be okay. But no, I discovered that wasn't quite true. I could calm down and then say something that might have come out of my parents' mouth. And then it was like, kaboom, a whole explosion would happen again. So really, it's about bringing these sort of two worlds together, like how to be less reactive and more calm and self-aware and self-compassionate. And then also then how to communicate and respond to our kids in a way that's just, more compassionate, but also just more effective as well.
I'm curious to know about when you became a parent, because I think, listening to you, I can certainly relate to that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I'm not being the parent I thought I was going to be. This is a lot harder. I'm not showing up in a good way. And you write very honestly about that in your book. I'm curious if going into parenting, especially knowing that you were studying mindfulness from a younger age, did you feel like you've got it covered? Like, did you go in thinking I'm going to ace this, or what was that realization like?
Totally. I totally thought it was going to be amazing because I started reading and studying about mindfulness when I was a teenager. And then about a decade later, I finally started practicing, and I was 27 when I began my first regular practice. And it was life-changing for me. I had been falling into these pits of despair at a pretty regularly pace in my life. Like every couple of weeks, I would just, when I was a teacher, I had panic attacks in the parking lot. And so the meditation practice for me was a huge life changer. It eliminated these pits that I would fall into every week or two. It was amazing. For me, it was a big life changer as far as bringing me more equanimity, etc. And then when I was 29, then 2 years later, I was pregnant with my first daughter. And I can definitely remember myself sitting with my big pregnant belly in my meditation group and just thinking, oh yeah, like I got this. This is going to be awesome. She's going to be so calm. We're just sitting and meditating together and then I just got hit with the hard, cold truth of parenting, which is that it's really like, it's incredibly intense. It's psychologically intense. It's physically intense. There's just so much. It's so demanding of us in so many different ways. We may or may not have support in those realms, in the physical, psychological, all those things. And so it really was a big shock to the system, how difficult it was. I mean, even from the very beginning, I had my daughter at a birth center, sort of a natural childbirth. So I had this crunchy community around me, and my birth center mama friends, some of them just seemed so blissed out. And my daughter was like kind of intense. And I was like, just wondering, what's going on? Why am I not having that experience?
Mm-hmm. Yes. That sounds very familiar to me.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it is such a shock to the system, as you said, that it is that we all go through. And I don't think anyone gets to escape that. Maybe there's like 1% of parents who it's just easy. But I always think it's when their kids get older, that's when their fun's going to begin. So we'll see. So I wonder if you could maybe give us a definition of mindfulness and also tell us what meditation for you looks like, because, I've done a few episodes on mindfulness, and I think there's a lot of myth around what it is, what it actually looks like. And I think meditation as well, people have this idea in their head of that it has to look like, sitting in quiet for an hour and turning off all thoughts. What is a realistic view of mindfulness meditation, or both together or separately?
Those are great questions because they aren't the same thing. And so mindfulness can be defined as, the intention to pay attention to what's happening in the present moment with an attitude of kindness and curiosity. So there's a couple parts there. There's setting that intention. I will be here in the present moment with what I'm doing. There's your attention. Our minds wander enormously. Our attention can be really broad or it can be really narrow. So it's about sort of shaping and practicing flexing that muscle of attention. And then in the present moment. And so we use usually some kind of anchor because our attention is very much like a little puppy and likes to wander away. And so we have to make it heal many times. And so you can use an anchor of, for instance, the breath is the most common. And then also with that attitude of kindness and curiosity is so important. Curiosity is the opposite of judgment. It's about what is happening right now? What are these sensations that I'm feeling? What are the emotions that are arising? And can I hold all of this with kindness? So it's about cultivating a real loving awareness of what is happening. And this is very different from the the way we are normally in our lives, and that our minds are, we are planning what's happening for dinner, and we are, engaged in our work, or somebody's talking to us and we're thinking about how we'll respond. And, we're very distracted in our lives very often. And sometimes we don't even see that until we start to sit in meditation. And meditation is there are many different kinds of meditation, but for the purposes here, it is one of the best ways to practice mindfulness. And mindfulness is a type of meditation where you're practicing to be present in the moment with kindness and curiosity. And so you can do that by bringing your attention back to the breath again and again and again. And the goal is not to clear your mind. That's going to happen when you're, maybe if you're enlightened, probably when you're dead. So the brain is, I think of it like this. The mind thinks just the same way the ears hear, right? We're not going to stop our ears from hearing things, and we're not going to stop our brain from thinking, but we can have more control over where our attention is going and what is doing. And it's basically about building a muscle of attention. And what's exciting about it for parents is that it helps us to be less reactive. It literally makes changes in the brain as we practice bringing our attention back to the breath 6,000 times during meditation. As we do this practice, as frustrating as it is and impossible as it feels in the very beginning, it's actually changing the brain to make your stress response areas of your brain, your fight, flight, and freeze response areas of the brain, to actually shrink them and actually grow more connectivity and more density in the prefrontal cortex areas of the brain, which is where your empathy, your higher order learning, your verbal ability, all these wonderful things are, right? So which we really want to access as parents. So it is really, really powerful. So basically mindfulness meditation is a gold standard for practicing mindfulness, but there are other ways to practice as well. I think I've said a lot of things about that. I want to just pause here and offer space for your questions, your thoughts.
Well, that was a very thorough answer. And it did bring up a question for me, because I think something just clicked in me that is new, because what we ultimately want, right, is to be able, as you said, to not be reactive. And, for parents, and especially parents who are raising differently wired kids, who often feel like there are just opportunities to practice those moments, multiple times a day. What I always hear from people, guests that I talk to and experts that I connect with, is it's all about, in that moment, being able to pause, right? And so what you're saying is, tell me if I'm wrong, the more we can practice this mindfulness, that will actually strengthen our ability to, in those difficult moments, be able to more call on that ability to take that pause. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. So it gives us this bit of space between stimulus and response, because in a meditation, we're practicing to become curious about what these spaces are, right? We're practicing to look at the spaces in between the thinking, to just practice that awareness. And then also what happens inevitably when one sits down for meditation is that you notice it's not terribly blissful. If you've ever tried, dear listener, you probably know this. It really feels like you get lost in thought, or even emotions arise, discomfort can arise. All these things can arise, and we practice to sort of sit and stay non-reactive through that with this attitude of kindness and curiosity. So something may arise for me in meditation, like a thought may trigger an anxiety. And so then I sit with that experience and I look at, what does that feel like in my body? And I can feel my chest constrict a little. I can feel my shoulders tighten, and I breathe and I practice just being with that, just allowing that to be there and giving it that space, and also practicing to allow those difficult feelings to be there is practicing non-reactivity, basically. And so then when we're in a difficult moment with our kids, and it feels difficult, our normal response to things that are uncomfortable is to change the situation, fix it, make it different, and what our kids often need from us, however they're wired, right? Like they often need for us to be able to, they want to be able to ground with us, right? To be able to use our stability to give it some to them, to offer them that stability. And when we can sit with a feeling that's uncomfortable, then we provide the space to sit with them and their uncomfortable feelings. And that is like a magic for kids, for anybody, to be able to hold space for something that's hard for somebody else is really, truly grounding. And it makes it so that difficult moments and difficult feelings are accepted. It's not saying that you're wrong. Sometimes when we're reactive, it gives this message that you shouldn't have these feelings. You're wrong or bad for having these feelings. And the truth is everybody has every range of feelings. And when we can sit and practice being non-reactive with them, we give our kids the implicit message that it's okay, that this is normal, this is human, and I'm still here for you, which is incredibly valuable. It's really unconditional love. Like, I'm here for you no matter what is happening, which is really beautiful.
During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls. And with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free, there are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm-fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words. Straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Synbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Synbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon, and that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Synbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Synbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Synbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. As you were explaining that, reminded me of Susan Stiffelman talks about being the captain of the ship, like having that leadership energy. And that's just such a good reminder, of that role that we can play and how desperately our kids, especially when they're going through a difficult moment, they do need us to be that grounded person, the anchor for them.
Yeah.
And you have a chapter called Taking Care of Difficult Feelings. And, you just touched upon this a little bit. You say that there are 2 kind of default reactions that most of us fall into with our emotions or our hard feelings. We either block them or we become flooded. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I think this is just pretty natural, right? Difficult feelings, they don't feel good. That's why we call them difficult feelings. And so culturally, it's hard to say what's kind of hardwired or culturally, but we tend to just want to not feel those feelings, right? We just we want to block them. And so we can block them by just kind of, ignoring the feelings, mentally pushing them away. We also block them by numbing them through different substances, alcohol, shopping, Facebook, whatever you're doing, right, to distract yourself from the difficult feelings is kind of a form of blocking. And so we're trying to push it away. But the problem with that is that I like to think of our feelings are like little toddlers, like a 3-year-old. Like our feelings are like 3-year-olds, and they are like, you will feel me or I will not go away. You must pay attention to me. And I think that's really true because when we block the feelings, it's kind of like trying to push a beach ball under the water. It pops up in some random place, even higher than it did before. It hasn't been dealt with. And so then we can often then go to the opposite side of the spectrum and become flooded. We become overwhelmed. We're in tears, or we're yelling, or we're angry, etc. So those are kind of the two ways that we deal with things often in our world. But the beauty of the middle path is that actually when we can just take a moment to mindfully feel the feelings, right? So if we can say, hello, frustration. Hello, frustration. I see you there, old friend. Okay, I see my frustration. I'm going to help myself take care of this, right? I'm going to help myself take care of this. Or hello, sadness, right? I see you there. And yeah, it's here because this thing happened and this is what it feels like. And as we can start to sit with and feel the sensations that emotions bring up in the body, we realize that we have the strength and the capacity to be able to feel these things. And we actually have a lot more capacity than we think we do, I think, often. And as we can sit with some things, then the feelings become like, a dark cloud that comes and then it rains for a little while and then it goes away. And without all that resistance and trying to push it away and things like that, it just kind of can go away more quickly. In fact, if we can really give ourselves time and attention to really, really pay attention to those feelings and maybe even let ourselves cry and all that, things can move through our bodies as quickly as in 60 seconds. It's really pretty amazing. But when we try to block, it does end up, coming back in some awkward time. They say our issues are in our tissues. I think it sort of goes into our tissues, right? So it really becomes this skill that we need to learn so that then we can, our kids can learn from us. It becomes a 2-for-1 deal once we sort of train ourselves how to take care of our difficult feelings.
I love that beach ball metaphor. I think that's such a good visual of what happens when we try to push things down, that they just resurface bigger. And what you said about 60 seconds, that emotion cycling through, I'm remembering learning from Martha Beck. She talks about grief, like when you're having those crying jags that you just feel will consume you and will never end if you really allow yourself to experience that. I don't remember exactly how many minutes, but it's a very small number of minutes that you will get a break from that. And so allowing yourself to really experiencing them. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It helps you process it in a more healthy way, more quickly, and then also modeling for our kids that this is survivable. We can all feel these big feelings and it's okay.
Exactly. Yeah, and it is scary. It's brave work to do that. And sometimes it is more skillful to have a glass of wine and watch 6 episodes of Grey's Anatomy. Like maybe that's more skillful sometimes, right? Like there may be times where it's skillful to numb a little bit, right? But as we begin to build in and trust our capacity to be able to hold things with loving awareness, our capacity grows and it really becomes this gift for your family, for your friends, for anyone you touch, to be able to have this capacity to be with those things becomes this real anchor for anyone you're in a close relationship with.
So for parents whose kids are in that time in their life where they are having those really big tantrums. And, I hear from parents all the time, and you probably do too, they're really in crisis mode. They're dealing with really challenging behaviors. When my son was younger, there were just months at a time where we just felt like we were walking on eggshells. And, it was just living with an explosive person really was difficult as a parent, because you just felt the feels were too big and you couldn't even get a moment's peace. So can you talk about your advice or thoughts for parents who are really kind of in the thick of it, and how they can kind of apply what you're talking about to get a little peace, or just even have the time to catch a breath, which often they don't even feel like they can do?
Yeah, I think that one of the most important things to remember when we're in the thick of it is that your needs are just as important as your child's needs, and that you taking care of your needs, whether that's need for alone time, space time with friends, sleep, all those things that we truly need as humans, those needs are really some of the only things that are going to help you parent well and skillfully. And many, especially moms, feel guilty for having time away from our children, for arranging for care through, by hook or by crook. And we shouldn't, because it is not the idea that self-care is selfish is really frustrating to me, because it's actually a responsibility. Self-care is not selfish. It is your responsibility. And it's our responsibility, as adults, to take a moment to step back and say, this is incredibly hard right now. This is so challenging, and I need help. I need space and time to myself. I need help. I need to find means of support. And it's very frustrating for me to give this advice, because I know how unsupportive our society in general, and our resources as far as services in the United States particularly are on this. But I really want to also say that you don't have to do it all alone. And trying to do it all alone is a recipe for crazy times and unskillful actions and choices on your part if you're completely drained and depleted. So I think it's really, really, really very important for us to support each other in making space and time for ourselves beyond parenting as well. So that is my number one most important, I think, piece of the answer to that question. And then when our kids are in those incredibly difficult times and we're suffering through that, one of the things that we want to remember is that it is normal and it is safe for our kids to have big, difficult feelings. One of the big things that often happen to us and happens in society is that when somebody has difficult feelings, we try to fix it or change it in some way. That may be your default mode or your partner's default mode. But it actually is much better to allow our kids to have these feelings. One of the best parenting moments I ever saw on social media was some celebrity, and he had a toddler daughter, and he and his family members were just standing around keeping her safe in a public place while she was on the ground, losing it completely. And it was so skillful, because there's nothing you can do in that moment when that child is completely losing it, except for be there for them and keep them safe and show them through as best you can, if you're able to, if you're not getting triggered yourself, that this is okay, that it's okay, it's safe, and I'm going to keep you safe, and you're not wrong or bad for feeling those things. So those are a couple important pieces of that conversation for when it's that really difficult time.
Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything. Because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
If you like this show, there's a decent chance you'll also enjoy the Shameless Mom Academy. Hi, I'm Sarah Dean, the founder and host of the Shameless Mom Academy. The Shameless Mom Academy is a podcast for moms that centers moms more than it centers your kids. I'm not going to teach you how to make baby food or how to make your 3-year-old or 13-year-old stop having tantrums. Instead, I'm going to bring you back to yourself. For the last 20 years, I've been helping moms through growth and transformation. Inside the Shameless Mom Academy, I help you identify who you are and who you are becoming. Look, motherhood is hard. It brought me to my knees many times and sometimes still does. Returning to who I am and who I am becoming allows me to decide how to show up in all those sticky motherhood moments, but also in all my other relationships and in all the ways I show up in my various communities. So come check out the Shameless Mom Academy wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm willing to bet you'll leave feeling a little inspired and maybe even completely fired up. And you'll probably laugh a few times because I promise we never take ourselves too seriously over here. With 700 episodes to choose from, you're likely going to find something that sparks and speaks to you inside the Shameless Mom Academy.
That's really helpful. And I love the priority on taking care of yourself. And I know from personal experience and from so many parents that I hear from that many of them just feel like they can't, like, that's not an option right now. And so that's part of, I think, this ongoing conversation is helping those parents recognize that it isn't an optional thing and nothing really is going to get better until we can kind of take that time for ourselves, whatever that is. And, I'm not talking about spa days. I'm talking about like moments of peace or groundedness and getting that support. And I also you talk a lot about self-compassion. I think you have a whole chapter about it in the book. And I think that's also such a critical piece of this. So many of us raising differently wired kids, we go through this either a period of regret where we realize maybe later than we think we should have that our child's atypical, and maybe we feel guilty about things that we did or ways we responded because we thought it was bad behavior as opposed to just how this child is wired. And then there's that sense of, this is my fault or I'm a failure as a parent. Can you talk a little bit more about self-compassion piece and why it's so important in showing up for our kids?
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. I mean, it's so foundational and it's research backed and it really makes a lot of sense. So when I had lost out my child and I was crying on the floor, and when I told myself I was a terrible parent, that message to myself was not helpful. Go figure. It left me feeling debilitated and helpless, and it kept me in a downward spiral. And the research shows that that's true because it makes a lot of sense. If you tell yourself, if you berate yourself, if you're harsh to yourself, if that inner voice is really mean and hard to yourself, and that's the voice you come back to when you are inevitably human and make a mistake, because we all will, then you're not going to want to step out of your comfort zone and take steps to grow and change that may be different and may be difficult, right? But if you can practice to offer yourself compassion when you have those inevitable moments when you are human and you mess up, because we all do. So when I started to respond to myself like, okay, this was terrible, this was hard, what can I learn from this? This was tough. This is a tough moment, but I can begin anew and I can learn from this. And when I started to take these challenges and see them as my teachers and say, what can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? That's when I started to really start to make change. And actually research shows this. So Kristin Neff from University of Austin has all this wonderful research on self-compassion showing that self-compassionate people actually are much more able to make changes and to take steps to grow and change old harmful habits, because that voice that they come back to is a voice of, this was hard, or what you might say to a good friend, right? And then with that softer landing, you're able to then try again, right? You're much more able to try again. So it really becomes a very foundational piece. And if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my goodness, my inner voice, she is mean. Then don't worry, you're normal and you can change it. This is something that can change with practice. So what you practice grows stronger, and it is totally okay if it feels really corny and weird and strange at first. That's totally fine. But if you can start to practice to recognize when you are inevitably human, as we all will be, and you inevitably make a mistake, and if you can then imagine, okay, well, the first piece is that mindfulness. What are these thoughts that I'm having? What am I telling myself? And start to bring this curiosity to what is the script that happens when I make a mistake, and start to interrupt that and question that. And then offer yourself, what if my best friend was feeling this way? What would I say to her? How would I talk to her? And then offer those words to yourself as if there's two parts of yourself in that moment. And then it's also really, really helpful to remember that you are not alone. We have 7 billion people on the planet. Any given time, there's guaranteed to be at least 1 million people feeling exactly how you're feeling. So if you tell yourself, oh, parents like Debbie never yell at their kids, or parents like Hunter never yell at their kids, and it's just me and I'm a terrible person, like that is not the message that's going to help you move forward more skillfully. But if you can remember, actually, yeah, Hunter still yells at your kids sometimes, and Debbie, she makes some mistakes. Everybody has had problems. There are plenty of people out there right now who are suffering in this moment the way I'm suffering, because this is really hard. Then that is also something that can help us get back on our feet. But it really is about offering ourselves that soft landing. It will help us grow and change. And also, you really want to, if doing it for yourself isn't motivating enough, you can practice this, and remember to practice this by doing it for your kids, because you need to know that who you are as a person is much more important than anything else as parents. And that inner voice over the at least 18 years of living with your kid is going to come out at some point. And it's certainly going to come out at some, when I was young, my mom struggled, and I remember seeing her in the mirror just saying to herself, oh, I'm so ugly. And it was heartbreaking, but I just watched this and, but lo and behold, what did I do when I was young 20s and late teens? I looked at myself in the mirror and I told myself I was so ugly, because I absorbed that inner voice from my mom. And so that your inner voice is going to come out sometime. And so maybe you can make that motivation to start to practice to change that for your kids, because you're like an orange, right? You're not going to squeeze an orange and get some beautiful pomegranate juice out of it. Like when you squeeze that orange, you're going to get orange juice, because what is inside is what will come out eventually. So we can start to shift and change that bit by bit.
That's great. Thank you for that. And I love that, remembering the legacy that we're leaving for our kids and what their inner voice is going to sound like. And that is really all the motivation we need,
Yeah.
Can you, before we say goodbye, I'd love it if you just, we've been talking around your book. So you wrote this new book. It's called Raising Good Humans, A Mindful Guide to Breaking the Cycle of Reactive Parenting and Raising Kind, Confident Kids. So can you just tell us what your hope for the book is and what parents can expect when they read it.
I know it's funny when you write a book for parents because parents are like, I don't have time to read a book. Well, so what this brings together, it brings together mindfulness and self-compassion with skillful communication in the second half. And so this book brings together the inner workings of how to start to shift and change yourself and grow yourself so that you can become a parent, as well as how to respond and talk to your kids so that you can get more cooperation over the long run. And what is in the book are a lot of practices and a lot of practical ways for you to make changes and tools to help kids with their strong emotions, how to sort of say the right things. And I like to structure it as a guide. Here's what to practice. Here is how to do this. I remember as I was in my intensive modes of studying and learning and going to trainings, I remember I was very inspired by certain speakers, but then I would say, how do you do this? What are the steps? And so Raising Good Humans is about the how. It's very much a how-to book.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, there are a lot of very practical tips and strategies in there, which again, especially when talking about mindfulness and these topics, I think it can be hard to get really in that practical. It can feel very idea-based. And so I appreciate everything that you share in there. Listeners, I'll have a link to that in the show notes page so you can check it out. And then Hunter, where else can listeners connect with you?
Sure. I host the Mindful Mama podcast, which is anywhere podcasts are found. And you can find me at mindfulmamamentor.com.
Awesome. Well, Hunter, congratulations on the book. And it's lovely. And also the cover is beautiful. I just have to say, I really love it. And thank you so much for just sharing your work with the world and with my audience. We're very lucky to have had you stop by today.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I really appreciate it. And thank you for doing what you're doing with Tilt and all of this. It's so wonderful. So glad we got to connect.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. For the show notes for this episode, visit tiltparenting.com/podcast and search for this conversation. If you like what you heard on today's episode, I would be grateful if you could take a minute to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating or a review. Thank you so much for helping us stay visible so people who would benefit from the show can easily find it. If you want to support the show and help me cover the cost of production, please consider joining my Patreon campaign. To support the show, just visit patreon.com/tiltparenting. Lastly, if you aren't already part of the online community at Tilt, I invite you to sign up at tiltparenting.com on the box in the bottom where it says Join the Revolution. Every Thursday, I send out a short email with a quick note from me, a link to that week's podcast episode, and links to 5 stories from the news that week that are relevant to parents like us. Again, you can sign up and learn more about Tilt at www.tiltparenting.com.
Are you overwhelmed by the things that get in the way of you doing what you want to do? Are you looking for ways to simplify life to better align with your values? Do you want to create space in your schedule so you have room for more of the good stuff? Play, joy, relationships, gratitude, and more? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I invite you to check out Edit Your Life, a podcast to help you edit the unnecessary from your life so you have more room to enjoy the awesome. Through episodes with me, Christine Coe, and a range of super smart, compassionate, and thoughtful guests, you'll come away with big picture insights and practical ways to declutter your home, schedule, and mental space without getting bogged down by perfection. I have always believed that small moments and actions matter tremendously. My goal is to help you find agency and space in your life through doable baby steps that will leave you feeling accomplished instead of overwhelmed. Check out Edit Your Life wherever you enjoy your podcasts.